Had two panels on it. The top panel was a shared panel, and the bottom was a private panel. And you could move things back and forth between those two. And so in a sense, there's two interaction spaces in that system, a private and a public one. And anyone who's used those systems, in particular, or anyone who's, could we close that door? Anyone who's designed those systems and tried to use them and evaluate their use usually sees there's a problem with coordination between those two interaction spaces. And that's what I'd like to talk about. I'm going to use a different system, namely this system, which has a text chat area in one panel and a shared whiteboard for drawings and text boxes in another. We call this the virtual math teams system. And we've been doing some researching. We use a system, the basic system here was the concert chat system that had these dual spaces. And the first author of this paper was the programmer who developed it. And I'm the director of the VMT project, which uses it. The concept behind it was developed by Martin Vesner, who's here to check out my presentation of his ideas. Just to give a little overview, the first part, which talks about two spaces, the dual interaction space, is really the dissertation work of Martin Mulford, the first author, and then I basically just translated his talk from German into English. And then I'm going to go into multiple interaction spaces, which we've been adding on top of his dual interaction space system. So I want to start by theoretical framework of principles of CSCL. They're kind of idiosyncratic. The first principle comes from my book on group cognition. Small groups are the engines of knowledge building. So that's the basic place that collaborative knowledge building takes place, is in small groups. So that's what we want to support in CSCL. And I want to make the, as far as I know, unsupported claim that chat can be the most powerful way, as opposed to, for instance, to be controversial, as opposed to threaded discussion in some certain other systems that are popular in CSCL. And in my paper yesterday, I argued, I think, that meaning making, which is the core process within knowledge building in small groups, that it can be supported by technological support for chat and graphics. One thing that we've learned in our project is that to have collaborative discourse about mathematics, which is what we're focused on, you need both chat and some kind of way of representing graphical relationships like a shared whiteboard. And therefore we need to design dual interaction spaces that can provide this. And when we try to do that, we find out that you can't just juxtapose the two areas the way Scribbles seems to do it. But you need to have certain connections between those to integrate them. The way, for instance, in Scribbles you can move things back and forth very easily. In our system we've tried to do it in three ways. One, through a referencing system where you can reference back and forth between the chat and the drawings. Secondly, history support where you can track activities that are going on and that have gone on in the past in the two areas, and ways of coordinating user interactions in the two areas. And so our system provides solution to these three problems in terms of technological support for affordances for deictic references, history awareness, and social awareness. And this is how it's done. don't know if you can read it, but so there's things like notices of activity up here and down here. It says who's typing or who's drawing or who's editing a text box. There's these references like this one, where it can reference from the chat into a certain area in the whiteboard. You can also reference up to previous chat messages. And there's also awareness that something, these little boxes show, there's some activity in the graphics area. So from one area, you have some sense of what's going on in the other interaction space. So there's been, at the Taiwan CSCL conference 2 years ago, there was an important workshop on dual interaction spaces with work primarily done in Europe by people like Dillenburg and his group. And actually, this dissertation work was inspired by that workshop there. And they saw there are different ways of dividing the activity between things like a chat area and a whiteboard. And so we're trying to build on the hypotheses that they explored in their work and to take that further in this one. A year ago at the ICLS conference, we presented an analysis of how, in this particular case, the students, two students wanted to talk about a certain area and build up a common ground or shared understanding of a certain area that they wanted to talk about the mathematics of this area. And they did it through, as we showed in our presentation a year ago, through a very subtle and complex combination of using chat and using this graphical referencing tool to look at different areas in the whiteboard simultaneously or closely coordinated with their chat statements. So I won't go into that since that's now in the literature. So these are, but using these new techniques, these new features of the system for coordination is something that obviously new users have to learn how to do it. And here's an example where here the person within the chat raises a question, and to answer it, somebody else tries to point here by using sort of a little chat image here, symbol, to point out, mainly saying, look over here for the answer. And then somebody else shows that you can use this referencing tool to do it. And so there's a progression there of learning, and then in the future they will all know how to use this to do better referencing for better coordination between the two. And here's an example of doing some mathematics actually. They want to calculate the number of white squares in this pattern. And they do it by taking all the squares together and subtracting the 4 red corners. And they start to do it in the chat, but they also use this area, which is more persistent. The chat will scroll off the screen, and so the important formulas they put in here, and then they reference them from the chat discussion. Okay, so much for the dual interaction spaces. So once we felt that we had that working and coordinated to a certain extent, we started complexifying the situation and adding more and more interaction spaces. Probably a huge mistake on our part. But at any rate, the question now is, how do we help users to handle that complexity? So we wanted to do all these different things. We wanted to support social networking and build a community of users who would come to our site and talk about mathematics together, form groups and know who else is around it, who else is interested in what, and build a community of people who wanted to talk about math. We wanted to add a more asynchronous, a more permanent interaction space where, so the small groups would get together synchronously in this chat environment, but then their results they would save on something like a wiki, which could be shared by other small groups in a more permanent way. And so in addition to the chat and drawing, we had a wiki, then we had ways of searching for different chat rooms that might be of interest, for different people that might be of interest, for browsing the whole information space that got built, and for building a platform really for longer term collaborative knowledge building. And a place that could even, so we could even move from having specific math problems, a challenge math problem that was a one-shot experience, to more of a curriculum around part of math. And also scripting the sessions, so there was more structure to the whole learning experience. And so we added a lobby like this that has a list of all the chat rooms that exist, so you can browse around, you can see which ones are active, you can see who's online now, you can see what activities going on, you can add new rooms, profiles for social networking, messaging system for social networking, connection to a wiki for the longer term, and all of these features are in progress now. And we added multiple within the Synchronous unit. We added multiple tabs. So in addition to the old workspace, we now have multiple workspaces that you can jump around to. For instance, you can do some work here, and then save a summary of that work to a special workspace for your summary. You can automatically move that summary to a special page of the wiki that's coordinated with this chat room, and then view that wiki page on this browser, or you have another browser where you can go over the whole World Wide Web and bring in information into your work here. So now it becomes much more complicated to keep track of what's going on, and we'll get to some of those issues. In the wiki, we have the possibility then for coordinating the work that's going on in a lot of different chat rooms. And in this case, we did a unit on probability with 7 or 8 different problems and suggesting 4 or 5 different strategies for solving probability problems, and then having rooms available for any combination of solving a particular problem with a particular strategy, mathematical strategy, and then summarizing what you did on a wiki page and then linking the appropriate links in the wiki page. I actually taught a whole course last quarter on human-computer interaction, nothing really to do with math. I had the students design this system or extend this system to support social networking better. And all of the course materials that I provided and that the students provided went into the wiki, and all their work was done in the chat rooms in small groups. So we tried out this complicated system. Worked quite well. So when you have multiple interaction spaces, you need to make a lot of things visible to the participants. Primarily, for instance, the history of the ongoing activity, where are the current areas of current activity, where are related resources that you might want to know when you're doing a certain thing, what's the current state and the history of the knowledge building process that's been going on at any level, whether it's what's a particular person been doing, what have I been doing in the past, what have my contributions been to the community, what's a small group been doing, and what's the whole community as a whole. And so we're looking at a number of mechanisms, some of which we've implemented, some of which we're designing. Support for pedagogical scripting, support for social awareness, and support for navigating across all these different interaction spaces. So here's the system, and one thing we want to do, for instance, is here we have a list of all the people who are active in this chat room right now, and we want to add to their name which interaction space they're active in right now. So if somebody is working in the Wiki tab, making some changes there, and somebody else is in this workspace, there's some indication both from up here where that person's working and here. So if I made a reference from the chat into the Wiki workspace and somebody else is working in a different workspace, they want to know that there's some activity in this one. So some indication on that tab as well as over there. Where the references go, be able to reference from the chat into any one of those different spaces. And also, as I kind of mentioned quickly, from the summary tab, have that connected to the wiki, so you can say, automatically move everything from my summary tab onto the associated wiki page, and have the wiki pages linked together in a reasonable way, automatically, depending on the chat room that they're associated with. So here's three major challenges. How to deepen the learning. So a lot of systems that are successful are very, very simple. The Facebook kind of things, even Jeremy's Scribble system at least appears from his presentation to be a very simple mechanism that any student anywhere in Texas can learn in 3 minutes or less, probably. And now we've made a system that's much more complicated than that. And that's a major design trade-off between simplicity, which is easy to use and much more likely to become widely used and successful, versus complexity that might be able to support a deeper kind of learning that takes place in Facebook. How to introduce inquiry learning into the kind of formal schooling where there's not a lot of inquiry going on. At the first keynote, Gerry certainly addressed this in his talk. The first keynote, Gerry Fisher talked about Ethan Illich's learning networks, which seemed like a very simple and appealing idea back in the 70s when Illich wrote about it. Now we understand much better the difficulty of doing that kind of thing, of implementing it. It's not at all simple. We're trying to basically implement Illich's learning networks with the Virtual Math Teams project. And it turns out to be something that takes millions of dollars of research, lots of people, and it's still very confusing how to go about doing it. It's not as easy as it appears when you read it in 2 pages of Illich's very inspiring work. And then how to integrate these things. So Jeremy laid out 3 basic things, kind of pedagogical, technological, and I forget what the 3 were, but anyway, the problem is to integrate them, which he didn't really talk about. But he must have put a lot of effort into doing that to be successful. And it's a very tricky thing. And a lot of our mechanisms are aimed at trying to do that kind of integration. So here's, we haven't gotten nearly as far as Gerry has. We haven't spent 12 years at it yet, but we already have a lot of people who have been working on it. And we couldn't have gotten anywhere near what we got without all of these people. Also international, our system's being used in Singapore, for instance. It was developed in Germany. We've had a lot of researchers come from a number of different countries. And here's some resources if you're interested to follow up on these ideas and themes. Thanks.
Technology, is that primarily like a meta technology that's used by people who are studying the system and designing the system?
It's used by the students.
Okay.
As a way of, so for instance, in my class, the students, each week they have 2 things to do. One was a design project, and one was some readings, some theoretical readings.
But this wasn't a mathematics class, this was your
Right,
graduate
but
class.
just as an
Yeah.
example, as the most developed example we have yet of using the wiki. So each week they would get together in the chat environment and discuss the reading of the week and discuss their design, their software design project. And they would summarize their work at the end of their session. They'd summarize it, and then they'd copy that to the wiki. And so on the wiki would be there was a page for each of these assignments, and each group's summary would be lined up, and then the instructor would come and read all of those and put the instructor's comments on that wiki page too. And then all the wiki pages for literature reviews were linked together, and so.
So this is just an example of extending the VMT environment to another domain in the.
That it's also an example of that. With the probability problem that I showed on the wiki, so every group of 4 or 5 students would meet in a chat room and talk about a problem during their session, and the summary of that would go then on the wiki page for that problem, and there'd be links within the wiki that would be automatically set up to link those together. So the students had to learn, how to chat. They already knew how to chat, how to use the whiteboard, how to use the referencing tool, and how to move things back and forth to the wiki and arrange them on the wiki. So, and then for researchers, it also becomes a lot more complex for us to follow what the group's done if they've been jumping back and forth to the wiki and browsing the internet and bringing those things back and forth, that information, sharing them, and it's hard to know what the different people in the group are doing at a given time, how that influences their interaction in the chat. So it makes things harder for everybody. So why did we do this?
Well,
It had to be done to support knowledge building.
Yeah, over time.
Yep.
I get it. I had assumed that the design work was designed on the VMT system, but that's not true. In the design course, they did other
For
kinds
my
of design.
students, in the HCI course, it was designing
On the VMT system.
designing extensions that they thought would be good for them. Yeah, it was a recursive project. Anything else? Tim, you must have questions even though you missed the talk. That doesn't matter.
I wouldn't embarrass myself by doing
Anybody?
Chat where maybe afterwards they continue discussions, things like that, trying to augment it themselves through means that you have designed.
We try not to have that happen because we want to research what they've done and we want to have a complete record of their interactions. So we do everything we can to avoid that. We tell them not to share personal information like your email address or your telephone number. Okay.
There is this idea that you learn because you have to do efforts to maintain a shared understanding or a shared conception of the problem.
Right.
So maybe if you add those tools and that referencing becomes more complex and that students have to do a lot of effort to know where the central space is or where the math is happening, it might be either you lose them or if the effort is doable, it might be a good thing for them.
That's a really important principle. I hope everybody caught it. But Patrick was saying that there's been really interesting studies, like by, I guess, Daniel Schwartz, for instance, that a lot of learning takes place when students struggle to do this coordination that's needed for collaboration. It forces them to bring their thinking, first of all, to make it visible to each other, but even more so, and explicit, even more so to develop a higher level of conceptual abstraction and so on. And that's something that's very important for the learning and the collaboration and knowledge building and advancement of knowledge of the whole group, to have these abstractions that are shared within the group. And so the hope, I think Patrick was saying, the hope is that even though we're making it more complex for the students to use, that may have this consequence of encouraging them to build more elaborate conceptualizations of what's going on in their collaboration.
Thank you very much.